Are you looking for ways to declutter and help organize your shop? Then you've come to the right place. I had back-to-back projects all last year and my shop was a wreck after the holidays. So in this video, I'm going to show you 3 quick and easy projects that I made to help take back wasted space in my shop. And I'm going to do a major upgrade on my workbench behind me, including one addition I've always wanted to try. Let's get to work.
I bought this laser a little over a year ago, and it takes up a huge footprint in the shop and makes the shelves behind it completely useless and inaccessible. So after playing around a little with some drawings and potential locations to relocate the laser, it was pretty much going to kill a bunch of space anywhere I put it. So to reclaim that valuable storage space, I decided to build up and around it. The idea I came up with was essentially to build some basic cabinets, but on stilts, and to make it mobile in case I ever do decide to move the laser. I glued and nailed the 4 corner legs out of 2x4s and then squared them up on the planer to make a nice, clean face to attach the side supports. For those, I used strategically placed pocket holes so that none would be visible after the final assembly. I designed this to go up against the wall and specifically to hover above the footprint of that laser, but you could easily adapt this same design to stand in the middle of a shop or over anything creating dead space. I'll be painting the whole thing, but once it's off the bench, it's not going back on. So I put a quick coat of rattle can on the bottom before I attached the totally overkill 2,400 pound rated casters. The cabinets themselves are a pretty straightforward face frame build. I used the cheapest 3/4 inch plywood I could find and assembled the carcasses using pocket holes and a 1/4 inch backing board. I ended up building 2 of these, one for each side, that leaves an empty area down the center that I'll be able to use to store small sheet goods I use most often in the laser.
There it is.
For that center section, I used a sheet of 1/2 inch plywood to build a simple box that I could use to just screw it all together for stability. And speaking of stability, it was about the time I installed that center section that I started to worry that this thing might accidentally collapse under the weight like one of those cheap plastic lawn chairs. So I cut out some 45-degree braces and installed those on the front and back. I should have done this part while they were on the bench, and I'm not really sure why I didn't think of it till now, but I added a divider to each side and installed some shelving. I made the face frames out of 1x3 pine assembled with pocket holes and attached them to the shells with a pin nailer. I wasn't super worried about that big gouge there because I'm planning to put up some wall control panels so as to not waste that space either. For the doors, I used that same 1x3 stock to cut the frames and ran them over a reversible rail and style shaper cutter, then glued and clamped them overnight. While I waited on the glue to dry, I wanted to get started on the painting. I had this raven colored paint left over from the pantry build and wanted to give it a try here in the shop. I'm also considering painting the cabinets around the miter station the same or a similar color. I don't know. What do you think? Will that be too dark? Also, fun fact I learned recently, if you're going to have to do a bunch of coats of paint, you don't have to pour all that back in every time. You can just wrap it in a plastic bag and it actually keeps just fine for several days. I normally use grocery bags, but this is what the wall control panels came in and didn't want to waste it. This quick and easy little project drastically improved the clutter on that side of my shop and more than doubled the storage space that was previously there, while also making it accessible. And I'm far less likely to set a bunch of junk on top of the laser now and have everything I need to use it within arm's reach. With that problem solved, it's time to tackle the messiest part of most people's shop, the lumber storage. Don't get me wrong, Those wall-mounted brackets are great, but they just don't hold small scraps very well. And I've seen a lot of YouTube videos where people have these really cool little scrap bins up against the wall, but I haven't seen one that stores sheet goods without wasting a bunch of space. So I designed this one to serve both purposes, but also so I can roll it out to the front of the shop to make unloading the truck easier, and also be able to roll it straight over to the workbench as needed. To that end, I picked up some casters that will allegedly support up to 4,400 pounds. I'm pretty sure this 1/2-inch plywood or the 2x4 frame underneath it would give out before we get to that weight, but if the 2x4s do ever give out, I'll just rebuild the frame out of steel and reuse the casters. I was trying to use as many scrap pieces of lumber as possible on this. So as I go, you're going to see some bits that look a little Frankenstein-like. But the plans I'll have available on the website will be for all new lumber and full coverage of the frame and storage boxes. All the framing was attached with 3-inch construction screws, and the plywood was attached with 1 1/4 construction screws. And these supports are a little over 3 feet long with 45-degree angles cut on both ends. I was a little worried that the plywood might slide off and potentially break a toe or 10, so I added this scrap of 1x3 as a stop block before setting it down on the ground. The casters rolled nice and smoothly, and it fit perfectly in the space between the garage bays, but could be equally at home, turned sideways, and pushed up against the wall. This was such a simple design and crazy easy to build. And now that I've been using it, my only regret is that I wish I'd built one sooner. Well, that, and I probably should have used 1/2-inch plywood on the front instead of this 1/4-inch stuff. But that's something I can fix on my next trip to Lowe's. If either of these first 2 ideas have helped you or given you a better idea for your own shop, atomic elbow that like button for me. It really does help small channels like mine. And if you want more frequent updates and behind-the-scenes info on upcoming projects, go check out my Patreon, where you can join now for free. The wall storage still isn't perfect, but this cart definitely helped make a huge difference. So now, let's tackle the wasted space under my workbench. I'm going to replace the whole top as part of this upgrade, but both the plywood and this sheet of Sintra are reusable, so I'll just stash them on my new lumber cart. The frame of this table is all 16 gauge 2x2 box frame. I reinforced the base when I built it, but for some reason didn't put a cross brace in the center of the top. So while I've got this all taken apart, I'm going to remedy that. I set the welder a little too hot on that first weld and absolutely blew through the steel. But I cranked it down and was able to fix it, so don't judge me solely on that first weld. Some of them almost look passable. I couldn't find my plumb line and I didn't want to waste a whole bunch of time looking for it. So I used some string and this Allen wrench to find straight down from the center of the upper support. If I'm right, it should line up directly on the center of the lower post. And thankfully, it did. I welded that up top and bottom, and then brought the plywood back over temporarily to start cutting the melamine. I had never seen melamine sheets in anything other than white, but I found these black ones for pretty cheap and decided to pick them up. So this project actually serves an extra purpose in that it's letting me get a little practice work with melamine for a couple new projects I've got on the horizon. So the idea here was to build 2 sets of drawers on each side of the workbench, while also leaving a little pass-through space for my router and sustainers. I also wanted to get all the slides mounted and leveled up on the bench, because it's a pain to crawl around on the floor and try to get those things just right. This 4-foot wallboard square came in really handy for this whole process. I also used it as a sliding stop for installing the rails, and it worked great, though I did have to clamp it to keep it from moving slightly at the far end. I cut some spreaders and drilled pocket holes in them to get the tops of the cabinets to the right width. Then I used a spacer bar and the pocket holes I drilled earlier in the melamine to make sure they were square and attached to the bottom of the table. For the new top, I doubled up 2 sheets of MDF, as I'd seen suggested in several places online. I pre-drilled holes all around, then augured them out with a countersink bit, and used self-tapping wood-to-metal screws to attach all the way around. Then, I always like to put a sheet of Sintra on top of my woodworking benches. It's great to cut on, easy to scrape glue off of, and cheap enough that I can replace it once a year without breaking the bank. But fair warning, it does not like heat.
Check this stuff out. Pre-made drawer sides. Should speed up this process.
And boy, did it. I've never made drawers this fast. They've already got the channel cut for the bottoms, they're pre-finished, and every 8-foot board was cheaper than a standard 1x6 at Home Depot. I just did the math for the widths I needed, cut everything to size, then used glue and pin nails to get them assembled. Pretty sure this saved me at least half a day's work. I did run out of the pre-made stuff and had to make these 2 big drawers out of 3/4 inch plywood. But that's probably better anyway, since they'll be holding heavier tools. For the fronts of the drawers, I cut up the other sheet of black melamine and edge banded the sides. I need to get more practice working with this stuff, particularly on keeping the saw from blowing out the edges. But I see why so many people use it to make furniture. And I've already got a project lined up where I'm planning to use a lot of it. To mount the fronts, I used the old double-sided tape and an 1/8 inch shim method, which works pretty good. And these gold drawer handles made for a great accent. The last thing I wanted to do to this bench was to add some dog holes. I've never used a workbench with dog holes, but I could definitely see where they would come in handy at times and wanted to give them a try. To do that, I cut out a template on my laser with 9 3/4 inch holes, all spaced 6 inches on center. I lined it up dead center and used a paint pen to outline each of the first holes before drilling them out with a 3/4 inch Forstner bit. Then I could just use a couple of aluminum dogs to line up the template to trace the rest of the holes on either side. The whole process was quick and easy, although the Forstner bit did squish a bunch of MDF into the area between the table and the sheet of Sintra. So I had to vacuum all that out and reattach it before using a 45-degree chamfer bit around each hole to clean them up. I bought a few different dogs and clamps, and I'm really looking forward to incorporating these into my workflow. And these hold downs are going to be super useful. Just need to add one finishing touch.
These 3 projects have already made a huge difference in helping me take back wasted space in my shop. And I've got the year off to a great start by decluttering and getting more organized. And if you're interested in one of these dog hole jigs, I'll have the cut files and the jigs themselves on my website. Thanks so much for watching, and if you want to keep hanging out, check out one of these 2 videos.